Researchers from the University of Cape Town, Dr. Lauren Arendse and Professor Prof Chibale, contributed to a groundbreaking discovery that suggests a cancer treatment currently in clinical trials may be able to shield against, treat and stop the spread of malaria. The groundbreaking study is a result of a partnership with a number of regional and international organizations from Spain, Germany and the United States. It offers fresh hope in the fight against a disease that claims more than 500,000 lives annually. And we're joined now to tell us more about this study by Professor Prof Chibale, who is the founder and director at the Drug Discovery and Development Center. Thank you very much, Prof, for availing yourself this morning. Very encouraging news, especially given how malaria at times ravages some parts of the continent. So maybe tell us more about the study and how it came about.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and good morning to your viewers. Yeah, so the study, in summary, is basically, as you said correctly, was focused on an approach we call repurposing. So this is the rational way of doing repurposing. By definition, is simply to look at drugs or medicines that have been approved, either for use in people already or which have been approved in clinical trials, which means, of course, then that they are deemed to be safe. And then the actual approach that we took was to look at the genome of the cancer cell and the genome of the malaria parasite in terms of some of the enzymes that are important to the functioning of the respective cells. And then that's what we zoomed on, and we prioritize a number of cancer drugs which share the similarities in terms of these particular enzymes. And that was a rational way of really approaching this, to exploit the genome information in the cancer cell and the malaria parasite. But also this repurposing approach is a way of fast-tracking the discovery of a potential drug, because it takes a very long time before you can find something that is safe and efficacious to be tested in patient. So that is the approach we took, and as you summarized correctly, this drug, which is in clinical trials for cancer, really has shown the potential to kill the malaria parasite at multiple stages, which has implications for both the prevention, the control in terms of cures, but also potentially interrupting transmission.
You speak of the potential to kill the malaria parasite. How high is that potential just from the trials that you've been conducting?
Oh, so the drug actually beautifully kills the malaria parasite. It does that in a very, very effective way. And these are all the studies that we've shown. All the data and experiments done is actually very, very effective at killing the malaria parasite. But what is important to really now emphasize is that in terms of what the next step is, so our work at the University of Cape Town Drug Discovery Center, H3D, we are focused on the early stages of the discovery process. So this is a way to fast-track the discovery of a drug that you can put into clinical trials immediately, which of course is not our remit. So we don't do clinical trials, we do the discovery. But what we are now working on to do is, because we understand how it works in cancer, and we understand and we know what the dose is in cancer, we are now working on modeling what the dose will be like in malaria patients, which is, the two diseases are very, very different. Cancer, the dose that is given to cancer patients tends to be very high. But we're looking at potentially a very low dose for treating an acute infection. So that basically is where we are. It's very effective at killing the parasite.
Sure. So you spoke of your part of the work, which is doing the discovery, and then there's the next part of clinical trials, which you are not involved in. But just how long until this can then be fully felt or, has a full effect for people on the ground, especially on the continent?
Yeah, so when we do what we call human dose predictions, which is something that we're actually working on, it will be up to our colleagues in the clinicians to now be able to, if we can work together with clinicians that can get the necessary funding to do the trial. That's all. How long it will take would depend on who will be up for for the fight in terms of getting partners that will be interested in doing the clinical trials, and of course raising the necessary resources to do the trials. But until that happens, it's difficult to put a time frame to it. But predicting what the human dose is going to be for malaria patients, that's a very quick job. We're actually working on that already. And then so when we make that information and that data available, then it will be up to our colleagues, the clinicians, and the funding agencies that we can partner with to find the resources to do a proper clinical trial.
Fair enough. You mentioned there that it will depend on who will be up for the fight to get funders. What does that suggest? That you do all of this hard work and then there's still more hurdles to jump, especially when it comes to funding of this so that it becomes a reality?
Yes. So, this is always the whole process of discovering and developing a medicine, first of all, is a very long process. It can take very long in things like malaria. It can take very long because of the low commercial returns in terms of who actually develops these drugs. But it's also a very expensive process. And what often happens is that we have to do these kinds of studies in partnership. And so the current work that we've been doing, has been funded from multiple sources, including the government of the Republic of South Africa, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been funding many of these studies that we've been doing. So that's been adequately funded. But now the next phase is for us to work with our partners to raise the money that will be necessary to do the clinical trials. So when I said those who are up for the fight, I really meant to say that this is not divorcing ourselves from that, is to basically look for clinician partners that we can work together with to raise the necessary funding to undertake this trial as soon as possible. Fair
enough. Prof, just to go back to your earlier explanation in terms of how this all came about, and you spoke of looking at the genome of the cancer cells. Was this a process of elimination? How did you settle on cancer cells?
Yeah, so scientifically, we understand some of these enzymes. We call them kinases. So these enzymes are very, very common to many cell types, and they are very important in, in the signaling, of the way cells communicate. So they are really, really critical to the way the cells function. And so these types of enzymes we call kinases, they are very highly conserved. They are conserved across many cell types. And so we know from just the sequencing of the human genome, which has been done already beautifully by scientists, but also we know the corresponding enzymes that are in the malaria parasites. So what we look to do is where there are similarities, we look to see what are the differences in the structure of the proteins in the respective cells that we can exploit to rationally design a drug that will kill the parasite without harming normal cells. So what we did, by the way, we actually studied about more than 80 cancer drugs that we know how they work. And so we also had an hypothesis because we worked on a previous project at the University of Cape Town where we also identified other drugs that act on the same types of enzymes in the malaria parasite. So on that basis, it was then rational for us to look for cancer drugs that we knew act in the same way as what we found from the previous one here. And so what we actually unraveled was quite exciting because we discovered that in the malaria parasite, the way this drug works is to actually target more than one protein in the parasite. And this is very powerful, very exciting, because from the point of view of mitigating resistance, the parasite develops resistance, to drugs, which can render that drug useless and malaria impossible to treat. But the beauty of how this drug works, which really offers the prospect of really either, circumventing the resistance, because it kills the parasite by inhibiting more than one enzyme, more than one kinase. Why this is important is because it's a lot easier for the parasite to develop resistance to a drug that only works by inhibiting or killing or targeting just one pathway or one enzyme. But it's a lot more challenging for the parasite to develop resistance if the drug kills it by hitting more than one target. And that's what is exciting about the way that we've unraveled how these cancer drugs kills the malaria parasites.
Prof, I share that excitement, hence I'm very curious to find out how long until this becomes a reality, especially since we are being made to understand that the continent is facing a particular challenge when it comes to malaria. So you spoke of commercial value or interest, and hence this is going to be a very long process, a very costly process as well. The continent has these African Center for Disease Control, or the Africa CDC. We've also got the African Medicines Agency, or the AMA. And so what role can they play in fast-tracking this discovery and making it a reality timelessly?
Yeah. COVID-19 has provided a blueprint of how we can fast-track or speed up not only the discovery of something, but the development. And so this is the unprecedented levels of collaboration and also significant investment between the private sector and the public sector, but also the partnership and collaboration in real time with regulators. And so what we have in especially the African Medicines Agency, when that really starts going, which of course is a little bit into the future, is really a mechanism to harmonize the environment so that this can really facilitate and fast track the performance of clinical trials, which need to be done across multiple countries which are representative of the African continent. So I think that precisely the kinds of partnerships that we need is what we saw COVID really provide. The private sector is just as important as the public sector. And the regulators also have, or everyone has to come to the party. But the information and the data is there, and so that's exactly why we could be looking for these partnerships to raise the funding that's necessary. And of course, seeking regulatory approval to do the trials in multiple African countries.
African solutions to African problems, they need to be supported and go beyond rhetoric. Thank you very much. Professor Kelly Chibale is the founder and director at the Drug Discovery and Development Center, also known as H3D.